My name is Kane Hawking, and ever since I was a child, video games have been a massive part of my life, with some of my earliest memories being of me with a controller of some kind in my hand. Now as an adult, I still love games as much as I did then, and even began reviewing them 2 years ago. One thing has always been on my mind though: how can I truly judge something without having tried to experience its creation myself? That's what this series aims to put to the test. So join me as I have my biggest challenge as a gamer yet, where I take to the world of developing a game for the very first time. This is my journey from critic to creator. Hello everyone and welcome to the very first episode of Critic to Creative, a series where I, an aspiring games journalist, put myself through the basics of creating a game whilst also discussing game design. This episode we're going into the planning and brainstorming behind some of our favourite games. How do we get an idea into a game that people actually want to play? But before we go into the actual designing and planning of games, what made me want to do this? What inspired me? What was my idea? The inspiration actually came from this book that I picked up last year, Blood, Sweat and Pixels. It goes into detail of some of the development hell of our favourite video games, including two that I included in the introduction to this very series: CD Projekt Red's The Witcher and Eric Baron's Stardew Valley, which took over 5 years to make. The book's look into development hell inspired me, and as I have done for the last 2 years, I decided and asked, how bad can it be? And have gone on a journey in creating my own game to see whether the art of creating a game can help me critique them further down the line. And whilst I do have the same development team as Mr. Barone, being a one-man size squad, I don't have the finance, time, or background to really create a game like his hit. Instead, I will be looking at the very basics of the games we play. Before all that though, we need to see what other game journalists think, and to do that we have to talk about the man who wrote Blood, Sweat and Pixels. Industry-renowned investigative journalist and news editor for Kotaku, Jason Schreier, actually wrote Blood, Sweat and Pixels as, in his own words, a journey through development hell, and ultimately a tribute to the dedicated diehards and unsung heroes who scale mountains of obstacles in their quest to create the best games imaginable. That's what I want this to be, my way of tipping my own hat to all the developers who struggle to create the games which I enjoy so much. Before all that though, I need to find a baseline for this argument that critics cannot criticize something without experiencing it themselves. It's an argument that's been eating away at me for a long time now, and I've always wanted to find out a bit more about its validity. So to do so, I spoke to some of the top industry publications, sent out a questionnaire asking these very questions, and here's what we found. What we found was a resounding negative response, with 75% of our subject group, when asked about the validity of the argument critics shouldn't be allowed to critique something without experiencing it firsthand, saying that there wasn't any point to the argument, with responses like the following: not at all. The role of the critic is to experience work for the audience and interpret it from the audience's point of view. Now, you're probably thinking, well, that's that then. Well, then we have the 25% of our focus group who, while overall agreeing that it isn't a necessity, believes that there is actually some validity, seeing the reason behind the argument without actually agreeing with it. I personally consider myself to be one of the latter. I don't personally see any necessity to the argument, but I do see some reasoning behind it, and the thought's always been there. So knowing that I'm not the only one who can actually kind of see some reason behind it has made me really curious to discover it a bit more and dig deeper in this series. Pinpointing how you plan a video game is a difficult one. There's so many different methods when it comes to planning that it can be hard to just nail down one specific method that works better than others. Some people just like to wing everything, some people like to meticulously plan every little detail to ensure maximum control over their project. And there's just too much to really explain. So why not get some developers to do it? And I actually went to gaming convention Insomnia 64 and I spoke to some of the indie developers there to see what they had to say.
We mostly do all our planning work online just because that's where we are. We're based online, we don't go to a studio, so we work in Discord mostly.
We call them puzzle chains because our game is quite logical, so you've got to make sure people don't get stuck. So we have essentially the main sort of goal at the end will be at the top of the chart, and then we have like each step for each puzzle as you go down, and then we can sort of move around and make sure you can sort of not get trapped because you can't pick up the key before you can get through the door. And then once we've sort of got the rough idea, we then map it out onto just a large sketch of the map with like red lines between all the locations to again just make sure you don't get trapped basically. And then once you've got that set up, we can probably just use Slack and stuff just to talk to each other after the fact and just keep everything up to date, really. But mostly paper, old-fashioned style.
So we started the game as Game Jam initially, and we had the initial concept of racing around the track, and the pinatas were there to cause a bit of chaos and crash into you, knock you off the track. The main style of game with the perks and everything came later. We then sat down and designed what we want certain things to do, coming up with the simple ones like boost to the more sort of drastic ones like the guacamole, where you get a mallet and you turn everyone into an avocado, smash the avocado and turn them into guacamole.
Just had a conversation about what the game was going to be initially, a series of conversations over time, and as development progressed we'd have those more written down, so we increased the amount of notes we were making as development progressed, so we keep track of the decisions we've made.
I think the key thing is that Nathan and I have known each other since we were 12, which means that we don't have the same difficulties that a lot of dev teams have because, well, we've been working together for a very, very long time.
Some interesting interpretations there when it comes to structuring and planning your video game, but when it comes to games, those aren't really the only way of structuring your thoughts. Earlier this year, I got to experience the exhibit Video Games Design, Play, Disrupt at the V&A in London, and there they had a collection of AAA titles from people like From Software's Bloodborne, Naughty Dog's The Last of Us, and even Hello Games' most infamous title in No Man's Sky. And whilst they all had very different methods of planning, different approaches and different styles of games, there was one consistent through line, and that's that all of their plans were physical. Whether they're 3D printed models of in-game assets or notebooks filled to the brim with sketches and story beats, the physical collection of tools to help craft your game seems to be a rather popular method, and I think it's the method for me. In fact, this is actually how I planned this very series, with a notebook filled to the brim of ideas that I wanted to use, from script ideas, shot concepts, and even down to the smallest details of like how I wanted to angle certain things when playing video games and getting game footage to use in the intro. It's all in this book. When it comes to a project of this scale, physical notes are going to be your friend far more than digital notes, but why is that though? Why are physical notes better? Let's have a look. A study conducted in 2011 by Professor Anne Mangan of Stavanger University in Norway in collaboration with Marseille University neurophysiologist Jean-Luc Villet wanted to compare the effectiveness of handwritten notes and digital notes. The study took two groups of volunteers and asked them both to learn an unfamiliar alphabet. Group A would be using the traditional method of pen and paper, handwriting their notes, while Group B would be using a keyboard. Results were calculated each week, which allowed Mangan and Villet to come to the conclusion that handwritten notes were superior. Why is that though? Well, this is because handwritten notes engage more senses than digital ones. The brain is more active when taking notes by hand, therefore it soaks in the information more effectively. This is all part of a study called haptics, often referred to as tactile or kinesthetic learning. Haptics is any form of interaction involving touch. Now I hear the questions rising, but surely typing on a keyboard is also haptics, and it involves touching. You would be right, but it's the complexity of handwritten notes that in theory exercise the brain more and therefore allow you to remember things better. You see, when typing on a keyboard, the physical interaction is rather limited, being a simple tap. This is why you occasionally forget messages that you sent shortly after sending them. Your brain wasn't absorbing the information while typing it out because it wasn't as active. Physically drawing each letter to form a word or sentence though, that requires a lot more processing power, exercising the brain enough to allow information to sink in more efficiently. The brain, like your body, needs to work out, so while it's far easier and more convenient to type up your masterpiece video game idea, it might be best to write your alien or fantasy language down physically, just in case. A good insight there into why handwritten notes are far more useful when it comes to keeping stuff in your mind. There are concerns that often appear when using physical notes, like they might get destroyed or your handwriting might not be legible. These are both concerns that I personally have all the time, but I found that having that book right there, having it physically there in front of me, was a lot more useful when gathering my thoughts and being able to put them down and create something. I don't know why, but for some reason having it physically in front of me instead of just buried in a million Word documents made it far more accessible somehow. And also, I felt more creative doing it. While I may only be doing the basics in this series, I've actually found an idea or two popping up whilst researching this episode that I've written down, and whilst I'm probably not going to be invested in the production side of things afterwards, if I am, they're already there, here, and elsewhere, ready. And who knows, if not, I might be able to pitch them elsewhere. Next episode, we look into the art of storytelling in video games. We have our idea, but how do we go about making it into a game worth playing? Tune in next time to find out. Until then though, I've been Kane Hawking, and we'll see you soon.